Somewhere between midnight and dawn, while everything feels quiet on the outside, your kidneys are still working, filtering, balancing, adjusting. But here's the part most people never think about. During those early morning hours, your body is naturally losing fluid, your blood becomes slightly thicker, and the pressure inside those tiny filtration units, the nephrons, begins to shift. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no pain, no warning signal, just a subtle strain building silently over time. Now, here's the contradiction that surprises most people. Many of the healthy morning habits you've been told to follow might actually be adding to that strain, especially if you're over 60. The very first thing you do after waking up, something that takes less than 30 seconds, can either ease that pressure or quietly make kidney function worse over the years, and almost nobody talks about the timing of it. Hi, I am Dr. Neil Spector. I've spent the better part of my career, over 2 decades now, working closely with patients whose health quietly shifted over time, often without obvious warning signs. In that span, I've seen how kidney function, in particular, tends to decline in ways that are easy to miss until the numbers start changing or symptoms finally appear. A large portion of my patients have been over the age of 60, many managing high blood pressure, heart disease, or diabetes. And what stands out isn't just the conditions themselves, it's how small everyday habits gradually shape the trajectory of those conditions. Not dramatic events, not rare diseases, just the accumulation of subtle patterns repeated day after day. I've had patients who were doing almost everything right on paper, taking their medications, watching their diet, but still saw their kidney function slipping over time. And when we take a closer look, sometimes the issue wasn't something obvious. It was timing. It was routine. It was the first few minutes of the day that no one had ever really discussed with them. That's part of why this topic matters to me. Because in medicine, we often focus on treatment after something goes wrong, but there's a different kind of value in understanding what's happening beneath the surface before it becomes a problem. And when it comes to the kidneys, those quiet early morning hours and what follows right after you wake up can be more important than most people realize. Most people think about hydration as something that happens during the day. You drink water when you feel thirsty, maybe keep a bottle nearby, and assume that as long as you're sipping regularly, your body will take care of the rest. It sounds reasonable, but it leaves out a very important piece of the puzzle. Your body doesn't operate the same way over a 24-hour period. In fact, your kidneys follow a kind of internal rhythm. During the day, they're working in a more dynamic, responsive state, adjusting to what you eat, what you drink, how active you are. But at night, everything shifts. Hormones that regulate fluid balance change. Urine production slows. Blood flow patterns subtly adjust. And if you go to bed even mildly dehydrated, that state doesn't just pause. It carries through several hours of reduced intake. By the time morning comes, your body is often in a slightly concentrated state. The blood is a bit thicker, the filtration pressure inside the kidneys is a bit higher, and the system is working harder than it would be if things were more balanced. This is where the common belief starts to fall apart. Hydration isn't just about how much water you drink, it's about when you drink it, and what you do in the hours before sleep, as well as right after waking, can either support your kidneys during this vulnerable window or quietly add to the strain. Once you start looking at it this way, the morning routine stops being a simple habit and becomes a physiological turning point. To really understand why this matters, it helps to picture your kidneys less as organs and more as a kind of highly sensitive filtration plant. Every minute, blood flows into them, and inside are millions of tiny filtering units, nephrons, that act like microscopic sieves. The rate at which this filtering happens is what we call the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. You can think of it as the speed and efficiency of the plant, how well it's able to clear waste while keeping what your body still needs. But here's the key: this system runs on pressure and flow. Just like any filtration plant, if the pressure is too high or the fluid is too thick, the filters begin to wear down over time. Hydration plays a direct role here. When you're well hydrated, your blood flows more smoothly, the pressure is balanced, and the kidneys can do their job without strain. When you're even slightly dehydrated, the blood becomes more concentrated, and the system has to push harder to maintain that same level of filtration. Now add another layer: hormonal control. A hormone called vasopressin, which increases at night, tells your body to conserve water. It reduces urine production and helps you hold onto fluid while you sleep. This is part of a natural nighttime maintenance cycle where the body shifts into a quieter, repair focused mode. But like any maintenance cycle, it works best under the right conditions. If the system enters the night already low on fluid, the kidneys are forced to operate in a more concentrated, higher pressure state for several hours. And over time, that subtle stress can begin to matter more than most people realize. Let's go a layer deeper, because the story of kidney health is never about a single factor. It's always a chain of connected mechanisms working together quietly in the background. First, hydration and blood volume. When you are properly hydrated, your blood maintains a healthy volume and flow. Think of it like a river system that stays wide and steady. As we age, that river naturally tends to run a little slower and thinner. If fluid intake drops, even slightly, the kidneys receive less flow, which increases the pressure they must generate to filter the same amount of waste. Over time, that extra workload matters more than most people realize. Then there's electrolyte balance: sodium, potassium, and other minerals that control how water moves in and out of cells. When this balance is off, cells either hold too much fluid or lose it too quickly, and the kidneys are forced to constantly readjust. In older adults, this regulation becomes less flexible, so even mild imbalances can create a heavier workload on the filtering system. Next is vasopressin, the nighttime hormone we mentioned earlier. As it rises during sleep, it signals the kidneys to concentrate urine and conserve water. This is efficient in a well-hydrated body, but in a slightly dehydrated state, it leads to highly concentrated urine sitting in the system for hours. Some clinical observations suggest this may contribute to gradual strain on filtration units over time, especially in older populations. There's also nitric oxide, a molecule supported by foods like beetroot. It helps relax blood vessels, improving renal blood flow. Small studies have shown that better vascular flexibility can support kidney perfusion, particularly in aging individuals whose vessels naturally stiffen. And finally, citrate, found in citrus like lemon. It binds to minerals in urine, helping reduce crystal formation. Research in nephrology has long noted its role in lowering kidney stone risk, which becomes more relevant as urine tends to become more concentrated with age. Each of these isn't dramatic on its own, but together they form the quiet biological architecture behind kidney resilience. I remember a patient in his late 60s, retired schoolteacher, generally disciplined with his health. He came in not because of pain, but because of fatigue that he couldn't quite explain. His blood pressure was creeping up, and his routine blood work showed early signs of reduced kidney function, not severe, but noticeable compared to previous years. When we talked through his daily habits, nothing stood out at first. He wasn't overeating salt, he wasn't missing medication, but one detail kept repeating itself: his hydration pattern. He would drink very little in the evening to avoid waking up at night, then start his morning with strong coffee almost immediately after getting out of bed, often before any water. What was happening, in simple terms, was a pattern of overnight dehydration followed by a sudden stimulant load on a system already under mild strain. His kidneys were essentially starting the day in a slightly concentrated state, then being pushed further by caffeine-induced fluid shifts. We didn't make dramatic changes. He didn't need anything extreme. We adjusted timing, introducing a glass of water shortly after waking, and gently improving evening hydration without overloading him at night. We also discussed spacing coffee so it wasn't the very first thing hitting his system each morning. A few months later, his follow-up labs showed stabilization rather than continued decline. His energy improved modestly, but more importantly, the trend had slowed. Another patient, a woman in her early 70s, had a similar pattern: mild dehydration in the morning, occasional dizziness, and rising kidney markers. Again, it wasn't a single cause, but a daily rhythm that didn't quite match her body's needs anymore. Small timing adjustments made a measurable difference in how she felt over time. When we step back from individual stories and look at broader research, the relationship between hydration patterns and kidney function becomes much clearer, even if it's still an evolving area of study. Work from major nephrology groups and academic institutions, including studies published through organizations like the National Kidney Foundation and various university hospitals, consistently highlights one central point: chronic low-grade dehydration can contribute to reduced renal perfusion over time. In simpler terms, when the kidneys repeatedly operate under slightly reduced fluid availability, they may have to maintain filtration under less than ideal conditions for extended periods. Sleep physiology research adds another important layer. During the night, the body naturally shifts into a state of reduced renal blood flow and increased vasopressin secretion. This is well documented in sleep medicine literature. The goal is conservation: less urine production, more water retention. However, studies observing older adults suggest that this balance becomes more sensitive with age. The kidneys respond less flexibly, meaning small deficits in hydration can result in more concentrated urine for longer durations. Electrolyte studies further support this connection. Sodium and potassium balance are tightly regulated by the kidneys, and even mild disruptions can increase workload. Research in clinical nutrition has shown that older adults are more susceptible to shifts in electrolyte stability, particularly when fluid intake is inconsistent across the day. Some observational studies have also noted that individuals with more consistent hydration patterns tend to show slower decline in estimated glomerular filtration rate over time, though these findings are not interpreted as direct cause and effect. Instead, they suggest a supportive role of steady fluid balance in maintaining renal performance. Taken together, the science doesn't point to dramatic single causes. It points to patterns: how hydration, sleep physiology, and kidney regulation interact quietly over years, shaping long-term function in ways that are often subtle but measurable. When we translate all of this into practical terms, the goal isn't to overload the body with rules, it's to support the kidneys through timing and consistency. One of the simplest adjustments is how you approach hydration in the evening and early morning. Rather than concentrating most of your fluids late in the day or avoiding them entirely after a certain hour, the more balanced approach is steady intake earlier in the evening, tapering gently as bedtime approaches. This allows the body to enter its natural nighttime conservation phase without starting in a depleted state. For most older adults, a moderate glass of water with or shortly after waking is often enough to gently reintroduce fluid into a system that has been under reduced intake for several hours. It doesn't need to be excessive. This isn't about flooding the body, but restoring baseline balance. Some people find it helpful to add small supportive elements to their hydration, like a squeeze of lemon in water. This provides citrate, which may assist with mineral balance in urine. Others, particularly those who sweat more or take certain medications, may benefit from light electrolyte support, but this should always be individualized, because not everyone needs added sodium or potassium. Where problems often arise is not from hydration itself, but from extremes. Drinking large amounts of water right before bed can disrupt sleep and strain the bladder. On the other hand, avoiding fluids too early in the evening can leave the body slightly dehydrated overnight. Another common issue is replacing water with sugary beverages or excessive caffeine, both of which can subtly alter kidney workload and fluid balance. What matters most is not a single perfect action, but how these small habits align. Consistent, moderate hydration, better timing, and avoiding extremes together create a more stable environment for the kidneys to function under less strain, especially as the body becomes more sensitive with age. When people begin adjusting something as simple as hydration timing, the changes rarely feel immediate in a dramatic sense. The body doesn't work like a switch. It responds gradually through small shifts that accumulate over time. In the first few nights, most people notice very little outward change. What's happening is mostly internal balance restoration. The kidneys are no longer starting the night in a slightly depleted state, so overnight concentration of urine becomes a bit more stable. Some individuals may notice slightly more comfortable mornings or a less heavy feeling on waking, but often it's subtle enough that it goes unrecognized at first. By the 2 to 3 week mark, patterns tend to become clearer. Morning energy may feel a little more consistent. Some people notice reduced dizziness upon standing, especially in older adults where fluid balance plays a bigger role in blood pressure regulation. Nighttime hydration habits begin to feel more natural, and the body starts adapting to a more predictable rhythm of intake and rest. Over 2 to 3 months, the changes are often reflected more in trends than sensations. Routine blood pressure readings may appear more stable. Kidney function markers, when tested as part of regular checkups, are less likely to show abrupt fluctuations. Again, this isn't about reversing disease or making extreme improvements. It's about reducing small, repeated stressors that accumulate silently over time. What's important to understand is that the kidneys respond best to consistency. They don't need sudden interventions. They benefit from a steady environment where fluid balance, timing, and workload remain predictable. And when that happens, the system doesn't announce its improvement loudly. It simply becomes more stable, more resilient, and less reactive over time. It's important to be very clear here. Hydration and timing strategies are not one size fits all, and in some situations, they need medical guidance rather than general adjustment. For individuals who already have diagnosed kidney disease, especially more advanced stages, the kidneys may not be able to regulate fluid and electrolytes in the usual way. In these cases, even small changes in fluid intake can have a significant impact on swelling, blood pressure, or overall balance. Similarly, people living with heart failure often have specific fluid restrictions because their heart and kidneys are working within a delicate compensatory system. For them, increasing fluid intake without supervision can sometimes do more harm than good. There are also patients on diuretics or medications that directly affect kidney function and fluid balance. In these cases, what seems like a simple lifestyle adjustment can interact with medication effects in ways that need to be monitored clinically. That's why any consistent change in hydration habits, especially if you have a known medical condition, should ideally be discussed with a physician who understands your history. Another important point is avoiding the opposite extreme, overhydration. There's a growing misconception that more water is always better, but that isn't true. Excess fluid intake, particularly in a short period of time, can dilute electrolytes like sodium and create its own set of risks, including fatigue, confusion, or in severe cases, dangerous imbalances. The goal is not to push water aggressively into the system, but to support natural balance. For most people, that means moderate, steady intake aligned with the body's rhythm, not extremes in either direction. If someone has ongoing symptoms like swelling in the legs, persistent fatigue, shortness of breath, or known kidney or heart conditions, it's always best to treat these adjustments as supportive, not primary treatment, and involve a healthcare professional in the process. If there's one idea to take away from everything we've discussed, it's this. Kidney health is not simply about how much water you drink, it's about how that water fits into the rhythm of your biology. For a long time, hydration has been treated as a numbers game. Drink more, stay well hydrated, and everything will take care of itself. But the body is more intelligent and more dynamic than that. Your kidneys are not static filters working in isolation. They are responsive organs, constantly adapting to blood flow, hormones, sleep cycles, and daily routines. They follow rhythm. During the day, they handle variation, meals, movement, stress, and fluid intake. At night, they shift into a quieter mode, influenced by hormones like vasopressin, slowing urine production and conserving balance. And in the early morning, they are transitioning again, moving from a concentrated, low intake state back into full activity. When you start to see it this way, even small habits take on a different meaning. A glass of water at the right time is no longer just hydration, it becomes a signal that helps the system reset more smoothly. Avoiding extremes before bed isn't just about comfort, it's about preventing unnecessary strain during a sensitive biological phase. Even something as simple as what you drink first thing in the morning can either support that transition or add a subtle layer of stress. Over time, these small choices don't create dramatic overnight transformations, they create patterns, and the body responds to patterns more than isolated actions. So the real shift here isn't just behavioral, it's perceptual. It's understanding that your kidneys are not just reacting to water intake, but to timing, consistency, and rhythm. And once you see that clearly, you start to understand your body in a more connected, more intuitive way than before. As we get older, the body doesn't become fragile in the way people often fear. It simply becomes more responsive to patterns we may have ignored when we were younger. The same habits that once had little noticeable effect can start to shape energy, circulation, and organ function in quieter but more meaningful ways. The kidneys are a good example of this. They don't usually fail suddenly. They adapt, compensate, and adjust for a long time before showing signs of strain. And because of that, the small decisions made every day, especially around something as basic as hydration and timing, begin to matter a little more with age. There's something reassuring in that as well. It means you don't always need major interventions to support your health. Sometimes it's about paying attention to rhythm, consistency, and the subtle ways your body is already trying to maintain balance. If this helped you see your own routine a little differently, it may be worth exploring other simple, often overlooked aspects of daily health that influence how we age and how we feel day to day. Feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments, especially if you've noticed changes in energy, hydration, or morning habits over time. And if you want more discussions like this, stay with the channel.